This is Stoneblock 3, and I am doing a quick walkthrough of the Applied Energistics mod. It is one of the OGs of mod packs. It's for storing your stuff, automatically crafting things. I used it like a decade ago when it came out, and I forgot half of how it worked, but it's one of the best mods out there. And I figured I'd save some notes about how to use it. So, to get started, you'll want an energy acceptor first. That will bring power into your AE2 network. You will also really want an energy cell to store that power and stabilize it. By the way, the AE2 network uses AE power. Most other mods these days use FE or RF, kind of interchangeable. It's a 2-to-1 ratio to bring power in. The system uses cable to connect things. There are two kinds of cable. There's the basic cable, which is the Fluix glass. There's the upgraded Fluix Smart cable, which also displays the number of channels on the cable and at the top of the screen. I'll show how it displays on the cable by putting a crafting terminal here. You'll notice the cable now shows a single blue line. That is one channel out of the 8 being used. Most items in AE2 have no interface. I can click on these. There's no interface. The crafting terminal has one. It lets you see the items in your network. Has some filtering systems for it. There's also pattern encoding. If you want your system to build stuff, you'll have to provide it some blanks. And you find a recipe, shove it in, and encode the pattern. So let's grab a couple quick recipes in here. Shove them in. Now we got a couple patterns down here. The shift key lets you see which patterns are which. And there's a pattern access terminal that lets you see all the patterns you've got stored in your system. We've got none, so let's store some patterns. For that, I will need to use a pattern provider. The pattern provider also uses a channel, so between the 3 terminals and the pattern provider, we're up to 4 out of the 8, running out of channels fast. And this pattern provider will need to be able to build things. It will need a molecular assembler. We can take these 2 recipes and shove it in there. Now that will bring these recipes here where I can, in theory, craft them, but I'm missing some goods, so let's fix that. I'm also missing a CPU to craft. You need the goods and the CPU. So, I happen to have some logs stored over here. Let's drop a cable over there and a storage bus. That will treat the chest as storage. Noteworthy, you can prioritize which storage you prefer the system use, so it'll bias towards storing in one place instead of the other. And now if I come over here, all the stuff that was in the chest is visible here, and as you would expect, if I shove stuff into the system, it uses the chest to keep track of it. Awesome. So, I'm still missing a crafting CPU. Let's drop one of those in too. We're up to 5 channels now because the storage bus also takes one. I'll drop the storage for the crafting and the crafting itself. It stores stuff that it wants to craft. And now we've used 6 channels. So let's build a bunch of stuff. I don't know, a couple hundred sticks. Now that I've told it to build sticks, you can see this guy's showing what he's doing. He's building 200 sticks. That UI is also visible in here, where you can see for each of your CPUs what they're currently doing, which is kind of fun to watch. You cannot build a second thing right now. If I tell it to craft planks, it'll say there's no CPUs available. So I recommend building more than just one CPU. A small handful of them can be useful. 8 channels won't last you very far. It gets you started for a small network, but you'll run out quickly. So you'll need to use the ME controller to fix this. Note that with the current setup, that the number of channels displayed is 6 across the board. But when I drop an ME controller and attach it to our network, the number of channels displayed now just reflects the number coming into the network. So there's one here, runs down this channel, joins the other. One's over here, one there, 2 there, there's 3 coming in there. They combine to 6. So there's still 6 channels, and nothing's really changed. It's just displaying them as they come from the ME controller, which is the heart of the network. It holds 8 killi AEs of power, You can look at to see everything in your network, including cables, total power stored, including, of course, the energy cell, usage, power usage, all this great stuff. Most importantly, it lets you have more channels. Every time you attach a regular cable, you get 8 channels out of that, and you can also attach dense cables, which give you 32 channels apiece for a whole lot more growth opportunities. Note that you can build these controllers in 3x3x3 or 5 cubed or 7 cubed shaped. That allows you to attach more cables if you ever run out, though I've never found a need for more than one. Also note that the dense cables can't attach all of these buses and exporters and stuff. Those don't attach to dense cables, so you'll run dense cables as trunks and attach the smaller smart cables off of them. Cable facades are also a great way to bury cables. You can have a network with all your cables buried underground, which makes them look much prettier. Alright, ME drives. This is how you store stuff in your network without using an external storage system. You may have noticed I've switched to using this Certus wrench. It can take apart parts of an AE2 build. This block here has a smart cable and a storage bus. If I use a pickaxe on it, they both get destroyed at once. But by shift clicking, sneak clicking with the wrench, I can remove part of it. Alright, I removed our storage from our network. It now has nothing in it. I will grab some logs and I can now shove them in. I'll shove the facades in too. Why not? They, of course, go in here where you can see that they're stored in that item cell. I can also attach an import bus to this. That will start importing every item out of there. You'll notice it's going kind of slow. I can speed that up with an acceleration card that increases the speed by 8. Every card increases it by a factor of 8, and you can put 4 in there. You can also filter by items and stuff, and there's other additional cards you can plug in there. Lastly, imagine that I screwed up and I actually didn't want to store stuff here. I could also shove a storage bus back on this. It's now for storage again, and I can use this other thing called an I/O port. The I/O port lets me clear disks, and so if I have a disk with some stuff in it, I shove the disk in there, they come out clean, and they've been relocated elsewhere in my AE2 network. The last big thing to talk about for fundamental getting to know AE2 and using it for most of your builds is external recipes. Now, in order to smelt iron, you actually have to smelt that externally. The AE2 system cannot build iron by itself. It doesn't know how to smelt by itself. Again, these crafting, smithing, and stone cutting patterns can be done in the molecular assembler, so I could shove those patterns in here. But the smelting pattern I just built has to go in something that actually smelts. In this case, we're using an old style furnace. Now to tap into that, I'm going to extend my dense cable interface here, and I'm going to run the smart cable all over this darn place because I will need to. Okay, so now I'm going to drop a pattern providing interface as opposed to pattern providing block over here and shove the recipe in. This tells the AE2 system I can build that using the furnace, at which point I can tell it to craft an iron ingot, which it thinks it's doing. But as we can predict, it's not doing anything because it doesn't have coal. For that, I'm going to have to export coal into this thing. And so I put an export bus on, and I explained to the AE2 it's supposed to be exporting coal. And it starts shoving coal in there, which is awesome. And the last step is I will have to import. And the import has to come from the bottom with a furnace. If I come from the sides, the import would take out the coal. The only way to get the iron and nothing but the iron is to import from the bottom. And as you may have seen from the overlay, that has worked for us. We now have an iron in the system. One last interesting quirk is that let's say I tell it to craft a lot of iron. It turns out the crafting of iron is producing XP, except I'm not getting any of it. In order to get the XP, I have to be the one to actually extract an iron ingot out of here. And so if you have a furnace in your system running for a long time, and you walk over and grab an iron ingot, all the XP it's been building up will drop into your hand. So it's a great way to store up XP for a later date. A couple more things on the AE2 mod. One is wireless access. If you want to wirelessly access, you build yourself a security terminal, you build yourself a wireless crafting terminal, and you shove it in the top to link it, see how it says linked, to this terminal. At this point it is now part of this network. Now I can't use it yet because it is low on power. For that you need to build a charger which taps the network and sucks power out. You can put the terminal in there, you can see it slowly charging. It turns out I don't need much charge to start using it. Still can't use it though because it's out of range, because I also need a wireless access point. And with the wireless access point I can now use the thing. If you hover over it, you'll see its power is going away ever so slowly. The amount of power loss is proportional to the distance. By default, this has a range of 16. If I come here at a range of around 15, you can see the power drops a little faster, whereas at range 16, it's completely out of range. I can also add a infinity booster card that allows it to go at farther ranges. But again, the farther the range, the faster it'll drop until it just dies in your hands. So the infinity booster is great, but you see how fast it drains the thing. It's not a great long-term solution. The better solution for distance is this slot here, which lets you upgrade this thing with up to 64 wireless boosters. Each one you add adds a certain percentage of distance. And so if I want to double the distance from 16 to 32-ish, I can add 7 boosters. And let's just go for 64-ish, which adds 13. So the downside, of course, is this uses more power, but this wireless crafting terminal, which used to die over here very quickly, is not taking hardly any power at all because the base has more power on it. Couple last things. This system can also store fluid. You end up using the import bus on external mods fluid tanks. If you want to build a recipe that requires water buckets, you can encode them this way. Now, by the way, this thing's defaulting to a water egg, which I don't have, and I now have got a crafting pattern with water eggs. Another hack in this game is if you sneak right-click on a pattern, you can erase the pattern, which I do all the time when I type in the wrong thing. I can fix this recipe to what I want, which is a water bucket, and once again it's going to almost work. Except this time it actually wants to use one capital B of water, which is actually a bucket of water. If I try to put this thing in here and craft something with that, it will complain that it doesn't have water, which of course I didn't want to use water, I wanted to use a bucket of water. To fix that, you have to get rid of fluid substitution, at which point you'll notice this recipe uses a water bucket, this one uses 1B of water. So if you want to use water buckets, you'll have to check that box. If you'd rather you import fluid, you can do that. The import and export buses work for fluid. You can also create drives that are fluid storage cells instead, and so you can store fluid in here the same way you store items. Anyway, that's about it for the AE2 mod. It is one of the OGs of Minecraft. It's been around for a long time. As mods go, it's one of the best ones out there. This is pretty much all you need to know. There's other stuff in here. Feel free to explore. Oh, one last thing is, just like you can erase recipes by shift-clicking on them, if you have a disk storage, sneak-clicking on them will break them up into constituent parts, which is useful if you want to use the storage component for something else. Anyway, that's about it. Have fun.